The Murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, 2002, Soham, UK, two 10-year-olds kidnapped and killed by Ian Huntley. On the evening of August 4, 2002, in the quiet English town of Soham, two young girls put on their brand new Manchester United football shirts and smiled for what would become the last photograph ever taken of them. Holly Wells, just 10 years old, with her blonde hair neatly tied back, stood shoulder to shoulder with her best friend, Jessica Chapman, also 10, with her auburn hair and bright, eager smile. At first glance, it looked like any other summer snapshot. Two children, full of innocence and joy, proud of their team, ready to enjoy the rest of the school holidays. But within hours, that photograph would take on a chilling significance. It would become an image broadcast across Britain and the wider world, symbolizing not just their disappearance, but the devastating loss of innocence that would haunt an entire nation. This is the story of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, of Soham, of how a tight-knit community was ripped apart, and of how Britain would never be the same again. To understand the impact of what happened in Soham, you need to first understand the place itself. Located in Cambridgeshire, about 70 miles north of London, Soham was a small market town of around 10,000 people at the time. It wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. It wasn't the kind of place parents worried when their children ran out to play in the park, or walked to the corner shop for sweets, or spent the day riding bikes in groups with friends. Soham was, in many ways, the picture of small-town England: modest terraced houses, schools where teachers often knew pupils' parents personally, shops where familiar faces greeted you by name, and churches whose bells rang out every Sunday morning. For centuries, Soham had been a town where everyone knew everyone, a place where gossip spread quickly, but crime was rare, and people prided themselves on looking out for one another. It was this atmosphere of comfort and safety that lulled many parents into a sense of trust. Soham was the kind of town where children could still enjoy what many today might call a 1970s childhood, playing outside unsupervised, knocking on friends' doors, or cycling down quiet streets without constant adult supervision. But as Britain would soon discover, even the most ordinary of places can hide extraordinary darkness. Holly Wells was born on October 4, 1991, to Nicola and Kevin Wells. Holly was a lively, outgoing girl, deeply loved by her family. She was known for her sweet nature, her laughter, and her caring spirit. Friends and family often described her as mature for her age, someone who looked after others, a little motherly even among her friends. She had a close bond with her parents and older brother, Oliver. That summer of 2002, Holly was enjoying her school holidays, playing with her friends, and getting excited about the return to school in just a few weeks. Jessica Chapman, born September 1, 1991, was the daughter of Sharon and Leslie Chapman. Jessica was described as full of energy and spunk, spirited, bubbly, with a cheeky side that often made her the center of attention. She loved her friends dearly, and her closeness with Holly was particularly special. Jessica also had 3 older sisters, which meant she grew up surrounded by family life and strong female influences. Like Holly, she was at that age where childhood still held its magic, but the teenage years were just around the corner. The friendship between Holly and Jessica was strong and genuine. They were inseparable, the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences, swapped secrets, and spent as much time together as possible. In many ways, they balanced each other's personalities, Holly with her caring steadiness, Jessica with her mischievous spark. Together, they were a force of joy. That bond would make their disappearance even more heart-wrenching. The summer of 2002 had been unremarkable in Britain, a mix of warm spells and rain showers, the usual ebb and flow of an English holiday season. On August 4th, the Wells family had organized a simple Sunday barbecue at their home in Redhouse Gardens, a quiet cul-de-sac in Soham. Neighbors would later remember the day as sunny and pleasant, the kind of day perfect for children to play outside and adults to enjoy food and conversation. That afternoon, Holly invited her best friend Jessica to join. For the girls, it was a treat, good food, laughter, and the comfort of being together. Nicola Wells, Holly's mother, remembered the two girls going upstairs at one point to change into matching Manchester United football shirts. United had just launched their new kit for the season, and Holly and Jessica were proud to wear them. The shirts were red, emblazoned with the Vodafone sponsor's logo, and they would become an enduring symbol of the case. After dressing up, the girls came downstairs and posed for a photo in the kitchen. Nicola snapped the picture on a digital camera. Neither she nor anyone else could have known that it would be the final image of the girls alive. It is important to pause here and reflect on just how ordinary that day seemed. Nothing about it carried the weight of tragedy. Parents mingled, food was grilled, children played. For decades, Soham had been a place where you could trust your neighbors, where crime was the kind of thing that happened somewhere else. And yet, in less than 24 hours, Soham would become the focus of one of the most intense manhunts and media spectacles in modern British history. The innocence of Holly and Jessica was not just the innocence of two children. It was the innocence of an entire town, a belief that some things simply didn't happen here. When that illusion was shattered, the grief would spread far beyond Cambridgeshire. It would capture the heart of a nation, and even the wider world. As Holly and Jessica laughed together that afternoon, no one could have imagined that danger lurked just streets away. The very person who would become responsible for their deaths lived right in the community, someone trusted, someone whose face was familiar. That reality, still chilling to consider, is part of what makes the Soham murders so devastating. In tragedies like this, hindsight often creates a trail of what-ifs and if-onlys. But on August 4th, there were no warning signs for the Wells family or the Chapmans. They were simply living life, celebrating summer, enjoying friendship. The girls' disappearance that evening would send shockwaves not only through their families, but through the whole of Britain. The tone changes dramatically. What began as an ordinary summer Sunday would quickly transform into a nightmare. A frantic search. A community mobilized. A mystery that, at first, seemed impossible to comprehend. And it all began with two little girls, walking out the front door in their red football shirts, never to return home again. The disappearance or the last goodbye. It was just after 6 p.m. on Sunday, August 4, 2002, when Holly and Jessica stepped out of the Wells family home. They had spent the afternoon enjoying the barbecue, playing, laughing, and showing off their new football shirts. Kevin and Nicola Wells thought nothing of it when the girls asked to pop out for a walk. After all, Soham was safe, and both Holly and Jessica knew their way around. The evening was still bright, it was summer, and daylight lingered. The girls left the Wells house chatting away, their red shirts bright against the backdrop of the quiet street. They promised they wouldn't be long. It was the last time their families saw them alive. Eyewitnesses later reported seeing Holly and Jessica walking through Soham around 6:15 p.m. They passed the local sports field and were spotted heading toward a nearby shop. Their cheerful presence was noticed, two young girls, inseparable, enjoying a summer evening. But after that, the trail began to vanish. Somewhere between leaving the Wells house and returning home, the girls simply disappeared. When the girls didn't return within the expected time, Nicola Wells grew uneasy. At first, she assumed they were simply caught up playing or had stopped at Jessica's house. But as minutes stretched into hours, that parental unease turned into genuine fear. By 8 p.m., the girls were officially missing. Kevin Wells began searching the streets, calling their names, retracing their usual paths. Jessica's parents did the same. Neighbors joined in, checking alleys, parks, and doorsteps. The Wells home, once filled with the sound of a cheerful barbecue, was now thick with dread. At around 9 p.m., the families contacted the police. This was not a case of two children staying out a bit late. Something was wrong. The Cambridgeshire police responded quickly. Uniformed officers arrived in Soham, joined by volunteers, neighbors, and local officials. Torches lit up the streets as people combed through bushes, fields, and playgrounds. Cars drove slowly along country lanes. Parents clutched photographs of Holly and Jessica, asking anyone they passed if they had seen the girls. But as the hours ticked on, there was no sign. Midnight came and went. By morning, the Wells and Chapman families were exhausted, terrified, and desperate for answers. On Monday morning, August 5, Nicola Wells provided the police with the digital photograph she had taken the day before, the image of Holly and Jessica in their matching Manchester United shirts. That picture was released to the media almost immediately. Within hours, the photograph was everywhere, on the front pages of newspapers, broadcast on television, pinned on lampposts and shop windows. The image was haunting in its simplicity. Two girls, smiling, innocent, and alive, and yet missing. It became one of the most recognized photographs in modern British crime history. For many, it was the first gut punch of the case. This wasn't an abstract tragedy. These were real children, full of life just yesterday. And now, their faces stared back at millions with a silent question: where are they? The search for Holly and Jessica escalated rapidly. By Monday afternoon, hundreds of officers were on the ground. Helicopters with heat-seeking cameras scanned the surrounding countryside. Police dogs scoured fields and waterways. Volunteers from Soham and nearby towns joined in, forming human chains to sweep through open areas. The media descended on Soham in force. Satellite vans lined the streets. Reporters jostled for interviews. National television devoted hours of coverage. The Wells and Chapman families made emotional appeals on camera, pleading for the safe return of their daughters. For the first 48 hours, hope remained high. Missing children, after all, are often found quickly. Maybe the girls had gotten lost, maybe they were hiding, maybe someone would spot them. Parents clung to the belief that the nightmare would soon end with relief. But as time stretched on, hope began to fray. By midweek, Soham no longer felt like the safe little town it had been just days earlier. Streets that once bustled with children playing were eerily quiet. Parents kept their kids indoors. Curtains were drawn. Conversations at shops, schools, and pubs revolved around the missing girls. Every stranger was eyed with suspicion. There was an unspoken fear: if Holly and Jessica weren't safe here, were any children safe at all? The girls' schoolmates were traumatized. Teachers struggled to provide comfort. The town's churches opened their doors for vigils, with candles lit and prayers whispered late into the night. Soham, once proud of its safety, was now suffocating under fear and grief. The Wells and Chapman families endured the unthinkable. Each day without news was torture. They appeared before cameras, their faces pale with exhaustion, their voices cracking with desperation. Kevin Wells described the agony of searching fields and ditches, dreading what he might find. Nicola Wells spoke directly to the girls on television, pleading for them to come home. Leslie and Sharon Chapman, equally devastated, echoed the calls. Their 3 older daughters rallied around them, but the family was crumbling under the weight of uncertainty. The parents reunited in their grief, but each felt the guilt and helplessness that comes with not being able to protect their children. At first, the police treated the case as a missing persons inquiry. But as days passed with no sign, the possibility of abduction loomed larger. Rumors swirled. Some thought the girls may have been lured away by someone they knew. Others feared a stranger had snatched them. The police interviewed known offenders in the area, checked nearby waterways, and reviewed CCTV from local shops. They appealed to drivers who had been in Soham that evening to come forward. Among those interviewed in the early days was a school caretaker named Ian Huntley. He lived with his partner, Maxine Carr, near where the girls were last seen. Huntley told police he had spoken to Holly and Jessica briefly on the evening they disappeared. At the time, his account seemed unremarkable. But in hindsight, his presence in those first days would take on chilling significance. By the end of the first week, Soham was gripped by dread. What began as a missing persons case was now clearly something far darker. The photograph of Holly and Jessica in their football shirts had burned into the national consciousness. The country was desperate for answers. But beneath the surface, the seeds of betrayal were already sown. The man who would later be revealed as the girl's killer had placed himself at the very center of the investigation, seemingly helpful, seemingly concerned, but hiding an unthinkable crime. Part 3 of this story will peel back those layers, the public appeals, the mounting suspicion, and the chilling role of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr. The investigation, suspicion, and the search enters a new phase. By the end of the first week of August 2002, the search for Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman had become one of the largest missing persons operations in British history. Police resources from across Cambridgeshire and neighbouring counties were drafted in. The command post in Soham turned into a hive of activity. Maps covered the walls, pins marking areas already searched. Officers worked around the clock, taking statements, logging sightings, and coordinating volunteer search parties. Helicopters buzzed overhead, and divers swept rivers and lakes. Despite the intensity, no concrete leads emerged. The families clung to hope, but investigators began to accept a darker possibility. This was no longer a case of two lost girls. Something or someone had taken them. Soham's community spirit was remarkable. Volunteers turned out in their hundreds. Shops donated food and drinks for searchers. Parents formed vigils, lighting candles at St. Andrew's Church. But beneath the unity was fear. Parents clutched their children tighter, warning them not to stray far. Strangers were eyed with suspicion. Rumors swirled through the village, whispers of suspicious vehicles, unfamiliar faces, or menacing strangers. The sense of safety that defined Soham had been shattered. The case captured the nation's heart. Newspapers carried daily updates, often with the haunting photograph of the girls on their front pages. News broadcasts opened with live reports from Soham. Every television set in Britain seemed tuned into the story. The Wells and Chapman families faced the cameras again and again, pleading for information. Their exhaustion was plain to see, but they refused to give up. The image of Kevin Wells choking back tears while describing Holly's smile broke hearts across the country. This media attention would soon play a pivotal role in exposing the truth. Among the locals frequently seen around the search efforts was Ian Huntley, the 28-year-old school caretaker at Soham Village College. He lived in a nearby rented house with his partner, Maxine Carr, a teaching assistant at St. Andrew's Primary School, the very school Holly and Jessica attended. In those early days, Huntley presented himself as a helpful, concerned neighbor. He gave interviews to the press, describing how he had seen the girls pass his house on the evening they vanished. He claimed they had stopped to ask about Maxine, who was away in Grimsby visiting family at the time. His demeanor seemed calm, even friendly. He positioned himself as just another villager desperate to help. But to some, there was something unsettling about his eagerness to appear in front of the cameras. If Huntley was the concerned local, Maxine Carr played the role of compassionate insider. When she returned from Grimsby, she appeared on television, speaking emotionally about the missing girls. She referred to Holly as "my little angel," recalling how she had helped her in class. To the public, her words seemed heartfelt, even maternal. Viewers were moved by her apparent closeness to the children. The presence of a female voice alongside Huntley helped to soften suspicion. But in reality, Carr was repeating his script. She hadn't seen Holly and Jessica on the day they vanished, but she was already entangled in Huntley's lies. As investigators cross-checked statements, inconsistencies began to emerge. Huntley's story of seeing the girls seemed rehearsed. He repeated it word for word in multiple interviews, as if clinging to a script. Detectives also noticed his odd behavior. He seemed eager to insert himself into the investigation, yet defensive when pressed. He volunteered information without being asked. Some officers quietly noted his nervousness, his tendency to sweat under questioning, and the way he shifted blame to others. Meanwhile, forensic teams combed through every inch of Soham. House-to-house inquiries were conducted. Huntley's home, directly on the girls' walking route, was visited, but at first nothing conclusive was found. As days stretched into weeks, the family's agony deepened. Every passing hour felt like a stolen chance of finding Holly and Jessica alive. Kevin Wells described the cruel cycle: bursts of hope whenever a lead came in, followed by crushing despair when it came to nothing. The media pressure was relentless. Journalists demanded answers. The police were criticized for failing to make progress. Public vigils grew larger, their silence heavy with anger and grief. In that tense atmosphere, suspicion shifted. Theories about strangers gave way to whispers about someone closer to home. Someone who knew the girls. Someone from Soham itself. By mid-August, Ian Huntley was more than just a helpful local. He had become a person of interest. His interviews with reporters were replayed endlessly. Some viewers noted his odd phrasing, his emotionless tone, the way his eyes darted away from the camera. Police, too, had questions. Why was he so quick to insert himself into the case? Why did his partner, Maxine Carr, speak so passionately about the girls as if she were deflecting attention? And why had no other strong leads emerged, despite the largest search in the region's history? The investigation began to pivot, subtly but unmistakably, toward Huntley. As suspicion grew, Soham's atmosphere darkened further. Neighbors speculated in hushed tones. The Wells and Chapman families endured daily torture, their private grief made public by the media spotlight. At St. Andrew's Primary School, teachers and students struggled with the absence of Holly and Jessica. Their empty desks were painful reminders. Maxine Carr, once seen as a supportive figure, began to appear less convincing as whispers spread. It was as if the entire village was holding its breath, waiting for the dam to break. By late August, the investigation had shifted decisively. What began as a search for missing children was now an active hunt for their abductor and possibly their killer. At the center of it all stood Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr, their calm public appearances masking a terrible secret: the breakthrough and arrests. By the third week of August 2002, the Soham investigation had entered a critical phase. The missing persons case was no longer being treated with the hopeful assumption that Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman might be found alive. The tone of police briefings shifted. Investigators now spoke of a criminal inquiry. Detectives felt the public's frustration. Over 11,000 house-to-house inquiries had been made, and over 1,500 vehicles examined. Volunteers had combed through hedgerows, ponds, abandoned barns, and miles of countryside, yet nothing. No clothing, no personal items, not even a footprint had surfaced. The silence was deafening. For the families, hope flickered painfully, but in the command center, the question changed, not where are the girls, but who took them, and why. One of the most powerful tools available to investigators was the systematic forensic sweep. Every home along the route the girls were thought to have taken was subjected to scrutiny. When police reached 5 College Close, the modest rented house of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr, their visit was initially routine. Huntley, as usual, was polite and cooperative. He repeated his story. The girls had stopped to ask after Maxine, then walked away. He insisted he had nothing more to add. But sharp-eyed officers noted details. Huntley seemed oddly keen to control the search, guiding them where to look, brushing off certain areas as irrelevant. One constable recalled later that he seemed anxious around the bathroom. Nothing incriminating was found in that first sweep, but Huntley's behavior was logged. The house, like many in Soham, would be revisited. As days wore on, Huntley's composure began to crack. He gave multiple interviews to the press, retelling the same story in a strangely robotic way. Observers noted his nervous tics, sweating, avoiding eye contact, over-explaining. To the casual viewer, these might have passed unnoticed. But to detectives trained in body language and deception, alarm bells rang. Huntley wasn't simply a helpful witness. He was too involved, too eager to narrate events. Meanwhile, Maxine Carr returned from Grimsby and stood by him, her own role growing. Her description of Holly as "my little angel" tugged at the nation's heartstrings, but also bound her to Huntley's account. If he fell, so would she. The key moment came when police scientists re-examined Huntley's home and workplace with advanced forensic methods. Fibers and microscopic traces were collected with painstaking care. In Huntley's Soham Village College caretaker's office, forensic officers discovered minute traces of clothing fibers that matched those from Holly Wells' Manchester United football shirt. It was the first solid evidence linking the girls to Huntley. The bathroom of his house also raised suspicions. Strong chemical smells suggested recent heavy cleaning. The bath sealant appeared newly replaced. Why would a caretaker, living a modest life, have reason to scrub and reseal his bathroom so aggressively in the days after 2 girls vanished? The forensic evidence didn't yet prove murder, but it gave investigators what they needed: grounds to escalate their scrutiny of Huntley and Carr. By now, Huntley and Carr were minor celebrities in the unfolding tragedy. Their faces appeared almost nightly on the news. This, paradoxically, hastened their downfall. Journalists who had interviewed Huntley began to compare notes. His repeated stories seemed unnaturally rehearsed. Some reporters whispered their own suspicions to police. Huntley seemed less a concerned neighbor than a man desperate to control the narrative. The families, too, began to distance themselves. Kevin Wells later admitted he felt something was off about Huntley, a strange detachment in his manner, as though he were performing rather than grieving. Public suspicion, once diffuse, began to converge. On August 17, 2002, the investigation reached a turning point. Police executed another detailed search of Huntley's home, this time with forensic teams equipped to dismantle fixtures and scour for hidden evidence. During this time, Huntley's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He appeared agitated, pacing, sweating. Officers described him as on edge, like a man waiting for a blow to fall. The blow came swiftly. That same day, 2 local dog walkers discovered disturbing evidence in a ditch near Lakenheath, about 12 miles from Soham. There, hidden in scrubland, were the charred and decomposed remains of 2 children's bodies. Though identification would take time, detectives knew instantly, Holly and Jessica had been found. The discovery of the bodies transformed the case overnight. Huntley, already the prime suspect, was placed under intense surveillance. Police knew if he realized the girls had been found, he might attempt to flee or harm himself. On August 18, 2002, Huntley and Carr were formally arrested. The charges were initially for obstruction of justice and suspicion of abduction. Huntley was taken into custody, his calm facade finally collapsing into visible panic. Maxine Carr, too, was arrested, accused of providing Huntley with a false alibi. Her emotional public appeals, once seen as heartfelt, were now reinterpreted as part of a calculated deception. The community of Soham, gathered outside their homes, watched in stunned silence as police vehicles whisked the pair away. For many, it was the first moment of grim clarity. The nightmare had a name and a face. News of the arrests spread like wildfire. Television broadcasts showed images of police swarming Huntley's house, carrying away boxes of evidence. Commentators struggled to convey the gravity of the moment. The 2 figures who had placed themselves at the heart of the search were now accused of the very crime. For Holly and Jessica's families, the news was both devastating and clarifying. The faint, stubborn hope that the girls might still be alive was extinguished. But at least, after agonizing weeks of uncertainty, they knew the search was over. The grief was overwhelming, but the hunt for justice had begun. In police interviews, Maxine Carr initially maintained her story. Huntley had been home the night of August 4, she insisted. She portrayed herself as a supportive partner, blind to suspicion. But detectives pressed harder. Evidence mounted that Carr had been in Grimsby that night, contradicting her alibi. Faced with the likelihood of being charged, her tone shifted. She admitted Huntley had pressured her into lying. Carr's story revealed her as both participant and pawn, entangled in Huntley's deception, but not directly complicit in the murders. Still, the public's fury against her was intense. To many, she was the woman who helped shield a child killer. The confession, trial and national outrage. The confession and shifting stories. When Ian Huntley was arrested in August 2002, he initially refused to admit any wrongdoing. In the interrogation room, his attitude swung wildly, at times arrogant and dismissive, at other times visibly shaken. He claimed over and over, "It was an accident. I didn't mean to hurt them." But detectives weren't convinced. Huntley's story kept changing. In one version, Holly had slipped and drowned in the bath while visiting. In another, Jessica had panicked, screamed, and he smothered her by mistake. Later, he claimed both deaths were accidental, and that he had panicked and disposed of the bodies. The inconsistencies became damning. Every version of his story minimized his intent, but each left one glaring truth: 2 children had entered his home, and neither left alive. Carr, meanwhile, was questioned separately. She admitted Huntley pressured her to provide him an alibi. At first, she stood firm in defending him, insisting he was innocent and couldn't hurt a fly. But forensic evidence destroyed her defense. Investigators revealed she had not been in Soham on August 4, but in Grimsby visiting family. Huntley had carefully crafted the sighting story to put himself in the narrative. Her false alibi made her guilty of perverting the course of justice. Under pressure, Carr broke down. She admitted she lied, but tried to frame it as loyalty. "I only said what he told me to say. I didn't know what he had done." Her admission was crucial. It left Huntley isolated, stripped of his last shield. Science played a pivotal role in dismantling Huntley's lies. Fibers from Holly's distinctive Manchester United shirt were found in Huntley's house in Carr. Cleaning evidence, investigators discovered that Huntley had heavily bleached and resealed parts of his bathroom shortly after the girls disappeared. Burnside, forensic teams at Lakenheath found evidence of attempts to destroy the bodies, accelerants, scorched earth, and melted plastic. These findings contradicted Huntley's panic accident story. The careful disposal showed deliberate concealment, not momentary panic. The trial began on November 5, 2003, at the Old Bailey in London. It became one of the most watched cases in modern British history. Prosecution's case. Led by Richard Latham QC, the prosecution painted Huntley as a manipulative predator with a history of inappropriate behavior toward young girls. Though previous allegations had not led to convictions, they revealed a pattern. The Crown argued that Huntley deliberately lured Holly and Jessica into his home and murdered them to silence them. His later actions, the cleaning, the disposal, the lies, were presented as proof of guilt. Defense's argument. Huntley's lawyers pushed his accident narrative. They insisted he panicked after Holly died in the bath and smothered Jessica only when she screamed. They argued he wasn't a monster, but a man trapped in a tragic mistake. But public and jury sympathy was non-existent. The calculated cover-up spoke louder than words. Throughout the trial, the Wells and Chapman families sat together, enduring the unbearable retelling of their daughter's final hours. Kevin Wells later described the experience as a living nightmare replayed in slow motion. The sight of Huntley in the dock, stone-faced and unemotional, deepened their pain. Their quiet dignity, however, became a symbol of strength. The British public watched in admiration at how they endured the legal ordeal with grace. On December 17, 2003, after weeks of testimony, the jury delivered its verdict. Ian Huntley, guilty of the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Sentenced to 2 life terms, with a recommendation that he never be released. Maxine Carr, guilty of perverting the course of justice. Sentenced to 3.5 years, but with time already served, she was released shortly after. Huntley showed no remorse. Carr wept as her sentence was read, but her crocodile tears earned her no sympathy from the public. The verdict unleashed a tidal wave of anger and sorrow. The public demanded answers. How had Huntley been hired as a school caretaker, despite past allegations of sexual misconduct with minors? Why were background checks so flawed? How could a predator slip through the system and live in plain sight of vulnerable children? The government responded with promises of reform. Background vetting systems for school employees were overhauled. The Criminal Records Bureau (CRB) checks were strengthened, a precursor to the Disclosure and Barring Service (DBS) used today. The Soham murders changed the landscape of child protection in Britain forever. The family's grief never faded. Holly and Jessica's parents became quiet advocates for child safety, determined that no other parent should endure what they had suffered. Kevin Wells later wrote in his memoir, "Goodbye, dearest Holly. Justice may have been done, but it could never bring back the laughter that once filled our home." The families carried their pain with dignity, their daughters remembered not as victims, but as bright, joyful children whose lives were stolen too soon. 2 decades later, the Soham murders remain etched in the national consciousness. They are remembered not only for their brutality but for how they exposed systemic failures in safeguarding children. The cases taught in criminology courses, studied in forensic science programs, and remembered every August when the town of Soham gathers in solemn tribute. For many in Britain, the faces of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman remain a symbol of innocence lost, and of a nation's determination to do better. The story of Soham is not only about tragedy. It is also about resilience, the families who endured, the community that stood together, and the reforms that arose to protect future generations. Yet, at its heart, it is the story of 2 10-year-old girls, best friends forever, whose trust was betrayed by an adult they should have been able to rely on. Their memory endures in every school safeguarding policy, in every parent's caution, and in the national conscience of the UK. Advice for parents and caregivers. The loss of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman is a stark reminder that even the safest-looking environments can hold hidden dangers. As parents and caregivers, vigilance is our strongest shield. Teach awareness, not fear. Help children understand safe versus unsafe situations in age-appropriate ways. Set boundaries, ensure they know where they can go, who they can trust, and when to check in. Know their circles, stay familiar with your child's friends, hangout spots, and the adults they interact with. Open communication, encourage them to share anything that makes them uncomfortable, no matter how small. Community watchfulness, safety is stronger when families, schools, and neighborhoods work together. Most importantly, balance protection with freedom. Children should grow up with joy and independence, but also with the confidence that the adults in their lives are watching out for them. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to support the channel. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thumbs up, keep liking and sharing the videos you enjoy, it helps us reach more viewers. Stay tuned, because more powerful and inspiring true crime stories are just one click away. Thank you for watching.